The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC as it is commonly referred to, has agreed a definition of climate change adaptation as being the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effects. For people in society, that means anticipating and, where appropriate, taking action to reduce the impact likely under a changing climate. For natural systems, this usually means human interventions to direct change. Adaptation happens in a lot of different ways. It can happen autonomously, and if widely adopted, this can have significant power to reduce impacts. An example of this is if individual households take up water tanks during periods of water restriction, then there can be a decreased demand in water in the future. We tend to think more often of planned adaptation. Many governments and businesses in Australia are building adaptation plans to manage their climate risk. At times, adaptation actions or planning are prompted by extreme events like floods or fires or observed climate change such as increased beach erosion. These are reactive adaptations. Adaptation can also be undertaken by both private and public actors. And finally, adaptation can happen incrementally through a series of small adjustments or actions, or through large-scale social change or large infrastructure change. An example of this was the Grantham community in Queensland that was moved to higher ground following extreme floods. The terms adaptation and mitigation can be confused. Mitigation is used to describe actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions like carbon and methane that are known to increase the effect of global warming. The more greenhouse gases collect in our atmosphere, the faster and greater we expect the planet will warm. Climate change leads to negative impacts that adaptation looks to address. Without efforts to keep greenhouse gas concentrations below certain levels, adaptation will become much harder and will reach the limits of its effectiveness. It's also important to consider if an adaptation action will increase emissions or to choose actions that can reduce emissions, such as passive solar design. It's important to remember that adaptation is undertaken by people and is determined by their agreed values. Decisions need to be made in the context of complex social and environmental factors. It can happen at a range of scales, from local, site-specific impacts to country-level plans and actions. There's no one right way. It can be a messy and difficult process, but has the potential to address a range of interconnected issues and identify new opportunities. Ideally, adaptation is done through an iterative decision-making and planning process. There are many adaptation management frameworks that step through several processes or phases. Here, I've summarised them into 4 common steps. First, a scoping and preparing step that focuses on determining what you want to achieve, getting buy-in and scoping your approach. This is followed by an assessment of vulnerability and quantification of risk. The third step involves identifying and evaluating adaptation actions and building a plan. And finally, the plan and actions are implemented, and along with an ongoing process of monitoring and evaluation. These frameworks often align well to the international guidelines for risk assessment like ISO 30100, but deal with the timescale and uncertainty that's associated with climate change. Given the complex nature of adaptation, it is worth having a range of tools or approaches. There is no right way, but there are some good guiding principles and examples. Allow for iteration and refinement both in preparing an initial plan but also in following up over subsequent years. You will not be able to make all decisions now and can expect new information over time, making it important to revisit your adaptation plan and actions on a regular basis. Like much future planning, you will encounter a level of uncertainty. Using a good decision-making process that considers a range of different possibilities and actions will help manage and account for this.